It's time to talk about the quarterbacks for this 2013 NFL draft. And a lot has been said about this class. It's been said that this class is weak, it sucks, da da da. Well, if you're comparing it to 2012 and guys like Luck and RG3 and Tannehill, that's not really fair. You say, oh, Russell Wilson. Remember, Russell Wilson was a third-round pick last year. Just saying. So all these other teams that thought Russell Wilson was so great that they let him drop to the third round, where the Seahawks were actually blasted, if you remember, for taking the guy. You got to remember that sometimes. This quarterback class reminds me a little bit maybe of 2011, the Newton, Locker, Gabbert, Ponder class with the Kaepernicks and the Daltons in the second round. Guys with talent but have questions. That's the way I kind of look at this quarterback class, is it has potential. It has the potential to produce several quality NFL starters, maybe even a couple potential franchise NFL quarterbacks, or it has the potential to produce a lot of NFL backups or flat-out busts that are out of the league in 3 or 4 years. That's the best way I can sum it up. It's almost like it's a quarterback class with fleas. Landry Jones comes from a major BCS school like Oklahoma, where he put up some prodigious numbers. He took over for Sam Bradford, was a 4-year starter. You look at Landry Jones on the surface and you see a guy with NFL size. You see a guy with an NFL arm. But then you realize he played in Bob Stoops' real one-read to no-read offense. And you just sit there and you say, does this guy really have what it takes? Like when I heard Bill Polian say that he thought Landry Jones was the top quarterback in this class, I say, I respect Bill Polian a lot, but I really think this old fossil has lost his ever-loving effing mind. There may be things to like, but he takes way too many hits in the pocket. He's not incredibly mobile at all. And again, to me, he has the deficit of coming from a system like Oklahoma's where he didn't have to do a lot of reads. I don't care what he says in Gruden's QB camp. He didn't. It was a lot of bubble screens. It's a lot of determining your read at the line of scrimmage before the snap and then not changing, not adjusting, not going through progressions at all. So I have serious concerns about Landry Jones. A lot of scouts and executives like to out-sleuth the other, and they try to find those mid-major gems, which is what I think some teams are going to look at when they see Zach Dicer from Miami of Ohio. They're going to see a guy with some things. They're going to see a guy with decent size, a decent arm, some athleticism, some mobility, and they're going to say, God, we get this guy in the 3rd or 4th round, stash him on a roster for 2 or 3 years, and he could be a potential franchise quarterback. That could very well be true. But I also see a guy whose accuracy is horrible, who it looks like at times he has a strong arm, but there are other times the ball seems to float on him. And it looks like he has the pocket presence of a Blaine Gabbert. Basically, if he gets any pass rush in his face, he's done for. So there are things to like, but there's quite a bit that makes me say, hey, hold on a second. Big Ben, he clearly is not. Tyler Bray comes from a major program like Tennessee. He's tall, he's got a strong arm, and you think with weapons like Patterson and Hunter and Rodgers around him over Rivera over the past couple of years, that he would have put up better numbers and that he should be a more well-thought-of NFL prospect. He's got the size, he's got the arm, but his mechanics are shit. They're some of the worst quarterbacks at mechanics I've seen in a very long time. And I mean that. They are horrible. There are questions about his leadership. There's questions about him on the field. There's questions about his maturity and his mental toughness. So he's a guy right there that some team is going to fall in love with some of the physical attributes, and they're going to completely ignore all these potential negative red flags that indicate this guy is going to be nothing more than a flame-out backup in 3 years. Or if he ever becomes a starter, he's going to be maddeningly, inconsistent, like, oh, the person I compared him to, Jay Cutler. I like Tyler Wilson in terms of his moxie. I think he's a good leader. He has good short and intermediate area accuracy. So at times he reminds me a little bit of Ryan Fitzpatrick, maybe not quite the athlete, but I also look at him and I see a guy that ultimately came from a Petrino system, and I keep seeing Brian Brom, a guy with a noodle arm that made bad decisions when he had to throw the ball into tight spaces and ultimately didn't hack it in the NFL. I have concerns about Tyler Wilson because I don't think he has the strongest NFL arm. When I went back and watched some of his throws at Arkansas over the past 2 years, I said, man, He barely fitted into that tight space at the college level. He's going to throw 25 or 30 picks if he does that crap at the NFL level starting for an entire season. He's a guy maybe you take in round 3 and you sit him on the roster for a year or two, and maybe he potentially develops. But if you're looking at Tyler Wilson, in my opinion, at this moment to be a franchise quarterback, you better hope a lot of things go right. When you watch Mike Glennon, and Mike Glennon is good, Mike Glennon is very nice to watch. He looks like the second coming of Christ in terms of a pocket NFL passer. He really does. With his 6'6" frame, his strong arm, his great mechanics. There are times where I watched him on film this year and I said, holy shit, this guy's the second coming of Tom Brady or Matt Ryan. I don't throw that praise around very lightly. But then there are other moments where his accuracy was very bad, his decision-making was god-awful, and his pocket presence was horrible, and he acted like Blaine Gabbert. I'm sorry to keep using Blaine Gabbert as a comparison here, but he reminded me of Blaine Gabbert in the sense that he had zero pocket presence, and he had zero ability to avoid the rush, and he seemed like he was afraid of the pass rush. So I could understand a team like Arizona is maybe going to take him in the second or third round, and Bruce Arians is going to get him in that system and say, with his strong arm and his size, I think I've got something for the future after Carson Palmer's done. And he could be right. But he also could be somebody like John Navarre. Remember him? My point exactly. When I look at Matt Scott, I see a guy that I think is going to surprise a lot of people in terms of where he's drafted. I think there's a very good chance that he goes in the second round, maybe high in the second round. With the proliferation of the read option and spread option being used in the NFL, you're going to take a look at a guy like Matt Scott, look at his athleticism, look at his mobility, look at his moxie, look at his ability to extend and make plays. They're going to be very impressed. I actually like Matt Scott quite a bit on film. There are things that I question. I don't know if he has the strongest arm in the world. Maybe his accuracy could be a little better in terms of how it translates to the NFL level. And the fact is he only played for 1 year as a starter at Arizona. He took over for Nick Foles. There are questions there. But somebody's going to take a chance on this guy probably in round 2 because they're going to see him, not as I see him, maybe like a Christian Ponder. They're going to fool themselves into thinking that he's a Russell Wilson. I don't think he has that level of intelligence for the game. I don't think he quite has that level of talent. But in this draft, taking a flyer on Matt Scott, he definitely has some upside, and he's a player I really like. Even though he's rated number 4 on my quarterbacks list, he's probably going to be either the second or more likely than not the first quarterback drafted this coming week, and that's Ryan Nassib from Syracuse. And he, to me, is the classic example of teams falling in love too much with arm strength. Need I remind NFL teams that Achilles Smith was once a 3rd overall pick? Do I need to remind you of that? Just because a guy has a strong arm, Jamarcus Russell once was the number 1 overall pick. Just because a guy has a great arm in terms of arm strength doesn't mean he can play quarterback. It doesn't mean that he can't. But when I saw him, I saw a guy, he was tough. I thought he was a decent leader. He never quit. He did have a strong arm, but I thought his mechanics were shitty. He's a good athlete, but not a great athlete. I thought his accuracy at times was lacking. His decision-making at times was lacking. You're going to hear a lot about him potentially going to Buffalo just because his old college coach, Doug Marrone, is there. And if they want to do that, that's fine. That's the type of shit that Buffalo would do, is pull a surprise in the top 10. They love to do that shit. See Dante Whitner, Stephen Gilmore, C.J. Spiller. Need I continue? But the bottom line is, I think if a team is expecting Ryan Nassib to come in right away and be anything close to an Andrew Luck, an RG3, or a Russell Wilson, I think they're fooling themselves. I'm not a huge fan of Ryan Nassib. I realize there's a lot of talent there, but I look at him and I see a guy that has a really strong arm that could end up just not hacking it in the NFL. Matt Barkley may get lucky. And what I mean by get lucky is even though he made the wrong decision, which was to return to school for his senior year, from a business and NFL draft standpoint, he may still end up being the second quarterback taken, and he may very well end up going in the top 10 or top 15 picks. Perhaps. Perhaps. When I look at Matt Barkley, he frustrated me a lot as a senior. He still put up really good numbers, but he had a lot of talent around him. He's a guy, I think he's a very accurate passer, but he plays in a system where it can mask some deficiencies. He has a good NFL arm. I don't think he has a great NFL arm. I've seen him at times make really good throws down the field, but I think if you're asking him sometimes to fit balls into tight windows, he could run into a bit of a problem. I think he's an okay athlete, enough to extend plays with his feet and move around in the pocket. I think his pocket presence at times and understanding, when to try for it and when to just cut your losses, I think that's lacking a little bit. I look at Matt Barkley, and with the problems with USC quarterbacks in the past few years, like the Castles and the Sanchez's and the Leinarts and the and the John David Booties, he's automatically going to get thrown into that category. And I don't think he's that. I think he's a better NFL prospect than any of those other guys that I mentioned. Still has a lot of areas of concern, but do I think that Matt Barkley could potentially develop into at least a somewhat franchise NFL quarterback? Yes, I do. 2 years ago, I was a really huge fan of Colin Kaepernick coming out of Nevada. And he went in the second round, and a lot of people didn't like his delivery. They said, he did it at Nevada. There were major questions about him. Well, there aren't a lot of questions about him now. He's the guy in San Francisco. When I look at E.J. Manuel, I see a guy who's an experienced starter. I see a guy with great size, great arm strength, with a lot of mobility and athleticism, really could potentially be, in that mold of a new wave dual threat read option quarterback at the NFL level. I see a lot of Colin Kaepernick in E.J. Manuel. I don't think he's quite the prospect that Kaepernick is, because I think his decision making at times, suspect. I think sometimes he failed to rise to the occasion in big games. He has a little bit of an injury history. That's concerning. E.J. Manuel, to me, is one of those guys, and I am a big E.J. Manuel fan. That's why he's my second-rated quarterback prospect. That's why I'd love if the Bears actually drafted him, even though they won't. He's one of those guys that looks like, in a lot of ways, the prototype of an NFL quarterback. But you could start picking apart the pieces and realize that he has a lot more work needed to make him that than what the packaging may represent itself as. But I think he has the potential to be a franchise quarterback. If you're asking me if I would take E.J. Manuel in this draft here, in the bottom half of round one, the answer is yes. Poor Geno Smith. He's not going to be the first quarterback drafted, more likely than not. He might not even be the second quarterback drafted this year anymore. He might be the third quarterback drafted. If that's the case, and he fell to 20, I would love it. Even though it wouldn't happen, I would love it if my Chicago Bears took him. But similar to E.J. Manuel, when you look at Geno Smith, a lot of the pieces look to be in place to where you say, this guy should be a franchise quarterback. And that's the way it is with a lot of these guys. You see the potential. You see decent size. You see good athleticism. You see a strong enough arm. You see some leadership. You see some football intelligence. But he's not the biggest guy in the world. His arm could be better. His accuracy at times could be better. His decision-making at times could be better. He throws a great deep ball, but there were times when he got pressured where he would lock on too much to one receiver or throw too many underneath routes when things down the field were more open. Geno Smith, more than any other quarterback prospect in this class, frustrates me. Because as I watched him the first half of the year, I said, yeah, this guy's the #1 overall pick. This guy's going to be a stud. Can't miss franchise quarterback. The second half of the year happened, and then I said, holy shit, what the hell's going to happen? It looked like he was a guy that didn't want to play in cold weather. It looked like when he played against good defenses that he just didn't bring his A game. I don't know what it was, but I still think Geno Smith is the best quarterback in this draft class. I know a lot of people probably don't agree with me, and that's fine. But, he represents to me, crystallizes, and personifies what this draft class is. A lot of potential for success, and a lot of potential for failure. But if I'm going to gamble, I'm going to gamble on somebody like Geno Smith because I think he has the most tools, the most elements that you look for in a successful franchise NFL quarterback.